So our speaker, as we can see, is Vicki Banthorpe from Momentum for Professionals. And Vicki's got 25 years, roughly, experience in the accounting sector. And she's a marketing consultant to accountancy firms, helping them get the marketing right, I'm guessing.
Trying.
And also, I think, as we said just before we started, getting a lot of questions about MTD, which is our topic for today, as you'll know. So marketing MTD to clients, to prospects, and even to your own team, because I guess everybody's got to be on board with what you're doing and how it's going to work for clients. So I'm just going to check that everybody else haven't got any more wins of the week to cover, but I can't see anything. But really nice to see you all here. And oh, win of the week. This is my colleague Holly, the AVN, the Accountants Network. Lovely walks in the sunshine, and that is a real plus, isn't it?
Definitely, definitely.
So I'm going to spotlight you, Vicki, and then we will get going. Okay.
Okay. Right. Morning, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen so you can see my slides. Okay. Everybody see that? That's okay?
Yep,
Good
that looks
stuff.
good, Vicki. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes.
brilliant. Thank you. Oh, well, thank you for that lovely introduction and great to be part of this. Thank you for AVN for inviting me. As we've sort of highlighted, I'm just going to spend the next sort of 45 minutes talking about MTD and marketing and how you can make that as effective as possible for your firm. So what I'm looking to cover, if the slides work, there we go, is taking you a step back really to let's just first of all start with what is your firm's strategy for MTD, because depending on that strategy, that is going to impact on how you do your marketing, who your target audience is, what your messages will be, and what channels of marketing you're going to use. So I've aimed this particular session at sort of partners in practice, but actually it is relevant for managers, the rest of the team, including admin people, anybody in your practice who's going to be involved with MTD and marketing it. There will be some useful tips that they could take away from this. And I think we need to look at why MTD communications matter, because whilst MTD's been sort of rumbling on for what seems an eternity, it only seems to be the last sort of 2 or 3 months where it's been noticeable how, certainly on social media and conversation with accountants, how it's suddenly like, oh, we need to be doing something about this. So I think that, bringing all that together, we need to be having MTD marketing at the forefront of our communication strategy. So as Susan just said, yes, I live down in Cornwall. I've been running Momentum for about 10 years, and I help accountancy firms across the country with their sort of marketing strategy. But then if they need help actually implementing that strategy, I can do that for them as well. And that might be copywriting, newsletters, website content, emails, whatever practical support you need, basically to make your marketing happen. So down in Cornwall, I live with my husband. We've got a little small holding. We have our dogs, we've got a couple of chickens, and we've also got a little flock of Swiss Valley black-nosed sheep, which you can see there, and they are supposedly the cutest sheep in the world, and I would definitely testify to that. They are lovely. So enough about me. Just need to bring that down a minute. So today, it's part of my preparations for this webinar, I conducted a bit of a straw poll on my social media platforms, but also talking to a few sort of friends and business connections that I have. And I said to them, okay, you're a self-assessment taxpayer. Are you actually aware of MTD for income tax, and what impact it's going to have on you? Now, I came back with, I think it was about 50 responses that I had altogether. So not a massive poll, but what's interesting is actually how it seems to reflect other polls and surveys I'm seeing that are coming to the fore now across the social media platforms. And so those results were, yes, I'm aware of MTD, over half the people saying that, but interestingly, just under half saying, well, vaguely aware, or no, I've not heard of it at all. And interestingly, of the couple of people I spoke to who answered, no, I've not heard of MTD, they actually they do their own tax returns. They don't have an accountant, and they'll be over the 50,000 threshold limit, so they've got to come on stream next April, and they weren't aware of that. So there's clearly a big a big requirement from accountants, from HMRC, from the rest of the profession to get the message out there about MTD. Clearly there's a lot of work to be done. So my presentation comes with a little bit of a caveat. If you've sort of joined the webinar today looking for the silver bullet of marketing, and particularly MTD marketing, I'm afraid you're not going to get one. And that's purely because every single one of you that's on this webinar, your firm is different. You're going to have a very different approach to your marketing because your firm will be a different size. Some of you will be sole practitioners. Some of you will be part of multi-office firms, multi-partner firms. Your individual strategies will be different. Your services will be different, and particularly your client base and who you want to target, where you're based, whether that's a regional practice, a countryside, a rural practice, or in a city. All those components mean that marketing is very difficult to actually sort of have a one size fits all approach. So what I want to achieve today is basically giving you some tips and ideas for you then to take back and say, actually, that would work for us. We could use that bit as well. So you create your own sort of bespoke marketing strategy for MTD. So before we get into marketing strategy, we need to look at, firstly, what are we trying to do as a practice? What is your MTD business strategy? And this comes down to sort of, what's the global plan here? Are we really just wanting to focus on our existing clients and give them a really good service and help them transition to MTD? Or do we want to use it as an opportunity to really grow the practice? So depending on how you sort of answer that question is going to have an impact on your resources. Do you need more staff to have the capacity to cope with additional work with MTD, if that's the route that you're going? If you need more staff or more hands on deck, is that going to be recruitment driven, or are you going to look to outsource? We need to be thinking about what's the service offering. Is it just the same as it's always been, or actually are we going to ramp up the bookkeeping side? And actually, are we looking to cross-sell other services? If we get somebody in to help them with bookkeeping, is there scope that we could do more for them with payroll, accounts prep, ultimately tax planning, and so on? So again, strategic considerations that we need to just be clear in our minds of before we really get into the marketing side of it. Likewise with software, what's your firm's strategy for software? Some firms are going down, it's zero or nothing. Other firms are saying, the other end of the spectrum, look, we'll work with any of our clients' software packages, whether it's Xero, QuickBooks, Sage, Iris, or bridging software. But your strategy for your software provision does impact on your staff. Will they need training on certain items of software? And also what services you then provide to your clients. And lastly, as part of your MTD business strategy, what are you going to charge? Now, again, there's no silver bullet for this. I don't have the answers because from the feedback I've had from accountants it's, again, very different. Some are saying nothing changes, we just charge our current rates. Others are saying, actually, we're going to really promote the bookkeeping, perhaps do it as a bit of a loss leader, to actually get new work in to then cross-sell other services. Other firms are going to do it on a sort of fixed package basis. So again, there's no answers I can give you. It very much comes down to sort of where your firm is on that spectrum and what you want to do. But when you've got it clear in your mind what your MTD business strategy is, we then need to look at your marketing strategy. And this is going to come down to sort of three options, really. What is your marketing strategy going to be for targeting or speaking to your existing clients? What are you going to be doing in terms of trying to attract new clients, if that's your strategic vision? But for most firms, they're going to be doing a little bit of both. I haven't come across very many firms who said it's for existing clients or nobody. Most firms are being open to the advantages of bringing in new clients. So your marketing strategy needs to bear those groups in mind in terms of existing and potential clients. And from that we need to then sort of break it down again in terms of, okay, who is the target audience? And Susan mentioned this just before we started, that actually your team members, and I would advocate that totally, they are totally part of your strategy. You need to get them on board right from the word go. So when you know what your MTD strategy is, you need to communicate that across all your team members, from partners, managers, down to sort of reception staff. Everybody needs to be sort of buying into this. They need to be fully aware of what MTD is, how it's going to affect people, what your firm is doing about it. So really sort of hammer that home, give them regular updates so that they're totally on board with what you're doing as a firm and how you're helping clients. Yes, your target audience will be existing clients and prospective clients, as we've already said. I would also extend that list to include introducers, so your third-party referrals. So what messages do we need to be saying to them to make them aware of the changes and how your firm is helping people, so they can redirect that if they're talking to clients that they might want to refer to you. If you've got a firm which specialises in particular sectors, is there a trade body, a professional body that it would be useful to sort of have discussions with? Could your firm be the go-to practice for that particular trade, to be the voice of MTD to advise people? So that is another sort of wider context of audience. And lastly, I wouldn't forget sort of friends and family. MTD for income tax has got wide-reaching sort of connotations for a lot of people. Your friends and family are likely to be sort of some of those people that it's all part of. So have conversations with them, keep them up to date, make them aware of what your firm's doing, because again, it could bring in new clients for you. So within your target audience, and when you're looking at your existing clients, now some of you may have done this already as part of your prep for getting ready for MTD, but I would say look further down your list of clients in terms of what segments they're in. So you've break it down in terms of your sole traders and your self-employed people. Which of those have just got that one income stream? Who else is just a landlord and just got property income? Who ticks the box of having income from various different sort of avenues? And what sectors are those clients in? Because those sectors will make a big difference to actually how you target them, the messages that you say. And sort of a loose explanation of that would be, if, for example, you were targeting people in the trades, so electricians, plumbers, builders, etc. When you're talking to those people, when you're writing things, when you're putting things on your website or emailing them, the words that you would use to target those people, I would suggest, would be slightly different than, say, if you were targeting barristers, if that was part of your sort of target group. With the barristers, you could probably go into a little bit more sort of legal jargon and explaining that, whereas I'd say perhaps with tradespeople, just keep it very simple. What's changing? How is it going to affect them? Who do they need to talk to? Another area of your client segments that you need to be aware of is actually those that are the digitally confident versus the digitally nervous. So those digitally confident people, you will know that if your existing clients, they're already using some form of accounting software, they're very IT literate. They're the ones you can sort of sleep soundly at night because you think, yeah, this is going to be fine for them. They'll breeze it. The digitally nervous are the few, and hopefully far between these days, people that turn up on your doorstep in January with their shoebox full of receipts. For this group of clients and potential clients, this is where the hard work comes in terms of making sure you're communicating often and well in advance. Those people are going to need a lot of hand holding. They're going to need a lot of reassuring and explaining as to what is changing and what steps they need to take. So we need to bring that through in our marketing messages to say, look, we can help everybody, and this is how we've helped previously people that have had to make this transition. And a final sort of segment of your existing client base is when you're looking down the sort of the income thresholds, excuse me, it's very easy to look at, right, who's on 50,000, who's on 30, who's on 20. But actually within those three sort of segments, just be careful, because certainly if we take the 50,000 threshold as of next April, it is quite likely that you will have clients that are currently nowhere near that threshold. They may have just started their business, or they've just had a bit of a slow start, but this year it started to ramp up. So while they may not sort of be anywhere close to that 50,000 threshold now, or have been, it could be likely that they will breach it, and so they will fall under HMRC's. They won't be under HMRC's radar at the moment, but they could have a bit of a shock come next April. So just sort of think of that in terms of when you're looking through your client segments. Is there anybody that I need to be just be a little bit more mindful of, that need to be aware of these changes? And the reason for sort of looking at those segments and being sort of very particular about our target audience is that we want to make our MTD communications as clear and as effective as possible. So we need to be using plain English, keep it jargon free, try not to use acronyms, because the accountants profession, we do love a good acronym. But you know, your person on the street isn't going to be sort of fully aware of MTD, and it's sort of in a standalone format. We need to explain it's Making Tax Digital. You need to make sure that your communications are getting across the practical nature of what's involved, what needs to change, what physically do they need to do, and actually what you can do to help them. So make sure we're getting that across in our messages. We definitely need to be reassuring people. For some, it will be a massive change. So let's get ourselves out there as being the go-to practice for being, they're telling me what's changing, but actually I understand that now. They seem to know what they're talking about. I want to work with these guys. Your communications need to be timely. So you know, we're now timely in terms of the 50,000 sort of threshold, and we need to build that up over time. You know, we can't just rely on a one-off sort of exercise. And probably the biggest thing that I would suggest in terms of having confident and effective marketing communications is repeating those messages time and time again, using different channels of marketing to make sure that those messages are getting through, that people are understanding change is coming, but this accountancy firm, my accountancy firm, is going to help you. So once we sort of look at that side of things, I've then sort of thought about, okay, if I was sat in your shoes, what MTD resources would I have in my toolbox that I could call upon to actually help me communicate MTD? The first thing I would say would be MTD guides. So this is like a factual document which you can put on your website. You can create it as a leaflet. You can have it in your newsletters, but something which tells people sort of what is MTD, warts and all. A real sort of factual sort of statement of when it's coming in, who it applies to, what changes will be required. And I think that will be something that will be referred back to time and time again over the coming months and years. Secondary to that, I think actually having a leaflet is a useful tool. This could be a PDF leaflet, doesn't have to be printed. Again, it comes down to your practices sort of culture of whether you do go paperless or whether you do send out post. But that leaflet should be, rather than having the full guide, I would have a leaflet which has a quick overview of MTD, refers people to your website for more information, but actually the leaflet should be more about the services that you can help people with, and making those call to actions very clear and how they can get in touch. The next area I'd be having in my toolbox would be blogs. So some of you may have already written a blog for your website which explains what the changes are. But over time, we need to be actually having new blogs that actually provide information and updates for people. So suggested sort of topics would be an update on how, if you've had any clients that have gone through the beta testing stages of MTD for income tax, just use the blog to talk people through that process, get them to engage with it. Okay, I see what's involved, but make it clear to them. Another blog might be giving some recommendations on the different types of software to use. So for example, if I've got quite a large self-employed business, I might already be using, or I'd be suitable to use, say, an end-to-end accounting package. If I had, say, if I was a landlord and I just had one or two residential properties with a minimum amount of transactions going through each month, then actually maybe using Excel with a bridging software product would be a better course of action for me. But a blog explaining what MTD software is, the options that people have, would be really useful. And so with your blogs over the coming weeks and months, I think look for topics that actually people are sort of searching for. What do people need to know? if you've got people ringing you up or your clients are asking you questions about MTD, could that be a blog that you could write so that it's actually beneficial to other people that come to your website? In terms of videos, I think these would be great. So just like 1 minute, 2 minute little videos, but again, just focusing on specific things of MTD, little facts that people need to be aware of. And again, you can bring that back to how your firm can help. But by far the biggest MTD tool you've got is you and your staff, and those one-to-one conversations that you can have with people. So it's not just about broadcasting information that we will do with other marketing avenues. When we get people to come and talk to us, that gives them so much more scope to be open about their situation, so they can ask really relevant questions which are, relevant to them, and what they need to do and how we do that. So the one-to-one conversations are by the biggest by far of what we need to be achieving in our toolbox. So when it comes to marketing channels, by channels I mean different marketing activities. I've split this into two cohorts really. Marketing channels that I would use for current clients and marketing channels I'd use to target prospective clients. So with my current clients, I would be having emails and or letters, again, depending on your preference in your practice. But I wouldn't just do a one-off email to sort of say, and some of you've already done this, I'm sure, that, right, MTD's coming in, this is the changes, give us a ring if you've got any concerns. Unless somebody actually thinks right that moment, oh, I need to get onto this now, they will forget about it. So I would be looking to do 2 or 3 emails, certainly on the run up to the April 26th deadline, just to keep it relevant to clients, keep reminding them, keep nudging them along the transitional process. I would also use newsletters, whether you use monthly or quarterly ones, and put something in there about MTD, and also what your service offering will be for that. If you're buying in newsletters from the likes of Mercia or 2020, apologies, I don't know if AVN do newsletters, but actually quite often there's a scope to actually add your own content, maybe instead of a couple of articles. So speak to your providers if you can do that, but I definitely keep mentioning MTD, over the coming months. Website, I've mentioned blogs, so I won't go through that again, but I would also suggest on your website, under your services section, actually having a dedicated service page to MTD for income tax. Because it's the sort of thing that people won't know where to look through accounting services or taxation services. It's the sort of thing that we need to make it clear very quickly, have it very visible. So actually having an MTD service page on your website, I think, is a really good thing. And again, I've got experience of working with the likes of Mercia and 2020 on updating their sort of templated websites, which a lot of accountants use. Those guys, certainly for me, have been very open to actually us adding additional pages on those websites. So don't be afraid to ask them. Another quick point about websites, which only came about this morning when I was just doing some research. If you're going to hold yourself and your firm out as being digitally advanced and we're here to help with MTD and automate life, and we're looking at efficient processes and how we can make that transition seamless for you, and make everything very digital and electronic, just stand back and take a look at your current websites. Because I looked at a potential client that had contacted me. I looked at their website this morning, and I'm guessing that website was probably 15 years old. It looked very dated. It looked very clunky. It wasn't selling the ideology of, we are the accountants to help you make this big digital leap. Okay, so just if there's one tip I can give you, just really double check that your website is currently sort of saying the same thing and looking the part, as well as sort of saying, yeah, we're here for help with the MTD. Moving on, social media posts. Yeah, these are great for prospective clients and current clients. My comment there with social media and your current clients is make sure you're following and as many of your current clients as possible, and they're reciprocating and following your posts, because that's another great way of just getting the message out to them without it always just coming through one channel, such as an email. And also consider doing webinars, seminars, workshops, anything which engages people, to let them talk about what's happening and let them share experiences. A lot of you will have done those when we were going through MTD for VAT. I would suggest that that's a similar sort of thing we can do here, even little sort of software workshops so people actually have a go at using different software if that's needed. So moving on to sort of prospective clients, I would advocate doing all of the above, or the previous marketing activities that I've just mentioned, but also some of the following ones. So the top of the list, I think, would be networking. And whether that's just going out as an attendee or actually whether you want to do some speaking slots at them. But if you go to a local business networking group, by and large, you've got a room full of people who all need to know about MTD for income tax. So anything that you can do to make it sure that it's your firm that is the local accountant that is telling people change is coming, this is what you need to do, our firm is here to help, is going to put you in really good standing. So it's a great way of raising your profile and getting your name out there as the go-to person for MTD. You might also want to consider PR, so getting sort of some articles into local press or maybe trade press. These would be non-salesy articles, so you're not there to sort of bang your drum of what your firm is doing. It's factual updates that you can give people to make them aware of the changes, but also, that they need to be doing something. They need to be talking to an accountant. Oh, and by the way, you usually can put your contact details at the end. So PR is a really good way of raising that profile. I talked a little bit about your website. Just a point there on your search engine optimization is when you're writing anything for your website, do bear in mind the buzzwords that we need to try and get people searching on, and incorporate those into your copy. With a little heads up though, a lot of people these days are not going via Google and search engines to find out information. They're actually putting that question into AI engines such as ChatGPT. So if you've been looking at your web stats recently and they seem to have fallen off a cliff, I wouldn't despair too much, unless there's a problem with your website, because I think lots of people are saying their website traffic has gone down massively, and that's because Google is unable to actually track if people are using sort of AI engines to ask questions and that they then ultimately get to your website. So with the AI model, it's a lot more about a Q&A style approach as opposed to sort of a full-on sort of detailed article. So even if you're writing blogs, maybe sort of frame them more as this is the question, this is our answer relating to it on MTD. Google Ads, bit of a Marmite subject. I've got clients that they've worked really well for, others haven't worked at all. My only comment with Google Ads on MTD is you are likely to be competing with the likes of Xero, Sage, QuickBooks, etc. on the terms making tax digital, MTD, etc. Now, I don't know how big your budget is, but I'm pretty certain these guys are going to be spending tens, if not hundreds of thousands on Google Ads and pay-per-click advertising. So you're not going to compete. It's going to be very difficult for you to be seen unless you personalize it to be sort of MTD in Rochdale or somewhere. So just be mindful of that with Google Ads before you potentially waste a lot of money. Exhibitions and events, another great way of raising that profile. If you're going to such events, I would make sure that MTD is a very prominent fixture on your display stands and on your literature, so that people walking by will think, oh, I keep hearing about MTD. Right, whilst I'm here, let me go have a chat. It's just making sure you're there at the right time where they're thinking about it. And sort of last, a few ideas for different marketing channels. If you're confident to do it, perhaps look at putting yourself out as the local expert, but potentially TV, radio stations might be interesting in interviewing. I've seen some people actually sort of doing radio phone-ins on certain topics, not just MTD, but actually, you'll go and sit in their studio and answer questions from the public ringing in. But that would be a really good way of actually putting your firm out as being the go-to MTD local expert. I've mentioned third-party referrals before. Client case studies and testimonials, another great way of actually selling how well your firm is doing in terms of helping people transition to MTD for income tax. So you can use case studies for people that are currently going through the beta test and how you've helped them do their submissions, and get them to talk about the hand-holding process, and actually wasn't as bad as I first thought, or if there was any problems, your firm was there to help them. For those of you that went through MTD for a VAT, by all means, draw on some of those scenarios, because it's the same process, how you help people digitize their VAT filing as to what we're doing now with income tax. And lastly, sort of adverts, another great way of actually just getting a profile out there. But again, think about your target audience. What type of publications, if any, would your target audience read? and only sort of place your adverts in those type of publications. But as I said at the start, the little sort of caveat of all those different activities, and there are 1,000,001 of the marketing activities that you could be doing, what you do will depend on your firm's strategy, but also, how much budget you've got to spend on this, what internal resource you've got in terms of people who actually can help you with your marketing, and whether you need to actually outsource that, if you haven't got the internal resource, or you physically just don't have the time to spend a lot of time writing articles or blogs or doing social media posts. What else can you do to make that marketing happen? But also it comes down to your practice culture. If I mentioned networking, if you feel really uncomfortable doing networking, then it's not going to be an activity that's going to be, successful for you. So either see if somebody else from the firm is happy to go in your place and be that sort of advocate for MTD in your practice, or do different exercises, different marketing activities. From my experience with working with accountants for the last 25 years, if I suggest an activity which they're not comfortable with, very rarely will they actually do it. So, we want this to work. We need our MTD communications to be efficient. We've got to do them. So they're more likely to happen if you feel comfortable doing them. Just want to move on now in terms of the messaging. And I think there's sort of 3 types of messages that we need to be saying. So I've put these forward as just to give you ideas of what you can then interpret for your own sort of copywriting. These 3 areas I think are broken down into, the factual side of it, being sort of transparent in what's changing. The second part is actually communicating the benefits of MTD, and how that's going to impact on taxpayers. And then the final part of the messaging is actually what your firm's offering, how you can help. So, be transparent when we're explaining the facts. Change is coming. We need to be prepared. Yes, there's a little bit of a fear factor that we can use in there, but that then has to be backed up with, don't worry, our accountancy firm has got your back. I think it's important to sort of stress that actually this is HMRC's overall plan for digitising the UK tax system. This is not just what your firm of accountants is doing as a bit of a whim and a fancy, because it'll make your life a bit easier. So by all means, blow it back to HMRC. But be clear, who is affected, what's the deadlines that they need to be aware of, and explain the different components. We're all in our little bubble, living and eating, breathing MTD at the moment, but taxpayers out there, they need to know they're going to have to start doing quarterly income and expenditure submissions. They're going to have to do a final declaration. They're going to have to start using MTD compatible software. They're going to have to make digital filing from now on. And they're still going to have to pay their tax in January and also July, if that's relevant for them. So let's get that factual statement out there as part of our messaging. I think the profession has got a huge sort of mountain to climb in terms of communicating the benefits of MTD, because a lot of people are adamant that they don't want change, and why do we have to do this? It's going to cost me more money. Okay, that in one respect, that's a difficult argument, but actually there are lots of benefits of MTD. And I think we saw this with the rollout of MTD for VAT. There was a lot of negativity surrounding that when people were sort of getting ready. But actually, as it transpired, most things went okay. It's all died down now. Everybody's moved on with their lives. What was all the kerfuffle about? Income tax might be less so, but I think there's stuff that we can do as accountants to actually make sure that we're getting the right messages out there. So, let's be transparent. Let's say to people, actually, rather than sending in your books and records in January and leaving it at the last minute, if you spread those, when you spread out those transactions and submit them quarterly, it just takes that stress away a bit. You really have to dig around for the previous quarter rather than the last 12 months. By doing those quarterly submissions, you're going to have a much better understanding on how your business is performing. So you can make more timely decisions about what you do your business over the coming months and quarters. And by being more efficient with your recording your income and expenditure, automating that process, you're going to free yourself up in the long run. You're going to have more time to spend with your own customers, building your business, or more time with family. However you want to spend your time, going digital is actually a benefit. big thing we need to be communicating actually is you're not going to have a nasty tax surprise in January. All too often people, will give you their books and records early part of January. You'll, pull the rabbit out of the hat, produce the accounts middle of January, and then say, oh, you've got 10 grand to find by the end of the year. And quite often it's caught a lot of people out. With MTD for income tax and the quarterly submissions, that should eradicate a lot of those surprises. So people should be more aware of what their likely tax position is. They can then budget that through the year. The cash flow will be improved. They can sleep more soundly at night. So the benefits and how we communicate them, I think, are key to this overall sort of being successful at our MTD communications. And then the last part of messaging is, okay, be clear. How can you help? Explain everything in plain English. Talk them through what will be required. That yes, we'll be there if you want us to be for the first submission. But it's your choice if you want to then do further ones yourself or you want us to do it. But we're here for you. We're not going to leave you in the lurch. We're with you every step of the way. And just stress that, if they're really hung up about, doing the digital bookkeeping, if they are the digitally nervous types, then you can do that for them. We can take all of that stress away. We can just make it as painless as possible. Again, we need to be saying that by having those up-to-date income and expense submissions during the year, we could actually potentially reduce their tax bill rather than just give everything all in the glut right at the end. I'd give them good proactive tax advice during the year. We can help you decide which MTD software is going to be best for your circumstances. And yeah, we can do as much or as little of this as you want us to. So be transparent in how we can help, but I think we need to keep reinforcing that in terms of how we help people and what we can do. So when you're writing your messages for MTD, I would run them through this quick check. Is what you're saying, are you educating people? Are you reassuring them that, yeah, change is coming? Don't worry, we're here, we can help you. And actually, is your message stimulating them into action? Are they going to actually contact you, to say, actually, can you help me with this? Or can you just explain a little bit more? What we're trying to achieve with all these messages, regardless of who our target audience is, whether that's our existing clients or potential clients, is actually to get them to have a conversation with us. If they're talking to us, we can look at ways that we can help them. It then opens up that conversation to wider services that potentially we could be offering them, not necessarily straight away, but down the line. So that's your sort of little check that, do your messages actually sort of conform to that little sort of checklist. One word I would suggest that we don't get too hung up on is digital, because we need to make sure that our communications for MTD are personal. And if you think about your accountancy practice and how it's grown over the years, yes, I'm sure it's because you are, technically supreme. You understand the tax UK system like the back of your hand. You're a superb accountant. But I would say most of the time, the reason your clients come to you and they stay with you is actually because of the personal relationships that you've developed with them over time. And that's just as critical when we're talking about MTD. More than ever, your clients and potentially your potential clients will want to have that personal interaction with you to fully understand what's required of them, what they need to be aware of, and how you can help. So make sure that your messages aren't too sort of digital, that they get across that family-friendly sort of personal approach, which your firm has become, synonymous with. And just a little comment here with regards to the future. So phases 2 and 3, the 30,000 income taxpayers and the 20,000 income taxpayers from April 27 and April 28. Don't wait to start talking to those clients or potential clients. We need to build that momentum with them over time. Don't just focus on the 50,000 ones that are due in as of next April. So when you're sending out communication to clients, I would make sure that actually the 30,000, the 20,000 taxpayers are also part of that sort of circulation. So, just start drip feeding them now with changes coming. Okay, not for a while yet, but we need to be aware of that. Certainly, because I think a lot of the £20,000 sort of taxpayers will probably fall more into the what I'll call the shoebox brigade. And so they will need a lot more time to adjust and a little bit more hand-holding. So bear that in mind when you're starting or building up your MTD communications. Your strategy that you're rolling out now, certainly with a view to your £50,000 taxpayers from next April, decide on what that strategy is, obviously, your target audience, the messaging, the marketing angles, and the activities you're going to use. But you may want to fine tune that over the coming weeks and months to make it fit when you want to target the 30,000 people and the 20,000 people. But from my perspective, I would be looking to really ramp up your communications to those second and third phase people. I'd start from next January, really sort of ramping up what communications and how often we do that for our £30,000 taxpayers, and then do the same the following January 27, for those that are on 20,000 or more. It's got to be a defined strategy that sort of builds up. So you've got a communication plan that sets out almost each month. What activities are we doing this month? Are we sending a newsletter? Are we going to a networking event? Are we placing an advert? And who is it targeting? So we can be clear on sort of what we're saying and when, and working to those deadlines accordingly. So that's been a bit of a gallop through MTD marketing. But as I said right at the start, what you do will very much decide on what your MTD strategy is for your firm, and then for the target audience that you want to go to, and the marketing activities that are going to be the best ones to get in front of that marketing of that target audience. You really need to get your team on board right from the start. So anything that you can give them to keep them up to speed, not just now straight away, but keeping them up to speed as the beta testing and we start getting more buy-in from people transitioning across. Make sure, as I've just said, you've got like a messaging timeline, like an action plan. So sort of ideally break it down once a month. What do we need to be saying and to whom, and in which marketing channel are we going to be doing that? Make sure that you think about what you're saying to your different audiences, break those segments down. Don't just think, right, we're emailing or we're talking to all clients. There are niche and separate segments within those groups, as we sort of detailed earlier, and your communications do need to be tailored. Your messaging needs to be sort of changed and adapted depending on which of those segments that we want to talk to. Do use multiple channels, so don't just rely on sending emails. We all respond. We need lots of sort of touch points these days before something resonates with us. So you're going to have to use your email, website, your social media, talking to people, picking up the phone, going to events. All those different touch points will just start to sort of sow the seed. MTD's coming. That's the firm I want to be talking to because they seem to have got this sussed. And I've said all the way through the process of this presentation, repetition is key. You've got to keep reminding people, updating the messages as the process goes along, but just being a constant sort of source of information and the place to go when anybody talks about MTD. So that's given you a lot to think about, I appreciate. If you'd like some help, I do offer a free marketing review for accountants, which you can register for that on my website. For those of you that are just sort of starting out in your communications, I've also written 2 documents which you can just basically top and tail with your firm's details. One is a client email or letter that you can send out, which just gives a brief overview of the change that's coming about and what your clients need to be aware of. The second is actually a guide to MTD, and that sets out in more detail what the changes are, who's affected by it, what changes they'll need to make. So a useful document to actually have on your website. You can send it in a newsletter, send it out with a client email, as well as a sort of a supplementary note to sort of give more information. And that again is a Word document, so you can copy and paste it and update it with your firm's own information as well. Both those products are available on the website. If you go to my website, I've actually got a separate section called MTD Marketing, and you can actually order those there. So I think that's enough from me. Over to Susan in the chat if there's any questions that anybody's got.
That was great, Vicki. Thank you so much. I'll leave your slide on screen for a bit in case people want to copy. I guess I don't think you can click on those as links, but copy those down. Yeah, I think that made it all sound really clear. Get a clear plan in place, and all the points you made were amazing. Thank you so much. So we've got a couple of questions. VJ's asking, do you provide training for MTD?
Um, yeah. It depends what you mean, VJ. I don't train people specifically on the MTD process. I think that's more in the accountant's field. I do sort of little updates. So almost like in a nutshell what I've done today, but rather than talking about marketing, I can talk people through the overall process, if you like, if that is something that would be of interest. But no specific training. I'm not quite sure which angle you were thinking there on VJ. But happy to, if you want to send me a message later, that's fine. If you want to expand on that discussion. And the second question, yeah, I think that's probably more Susan's. Yes, I think the slides will be made available to people on the AVN chat, I think.
Yeah, the slides will be in the Accountants Know-How Club, as will the whole webinar recording. So everything will be up there, and I will quickly type in the link for that. If I can just, I can't think,
Yeah, no,
I
it's
can't
fine.
talk and type at the same time. Let
Well,
me,
I'll talk for you.
yeah.
So that looks like potentially Jazz has put a question. What are your early thoughts on pricing? I think, as I said in my presentation, Jazz, the feedback, I'm not directly involved with setting any pricing for firms. And I can speak to 10 accountancy firms and I'll get 10 different views on what they're doing with pricing. From the current pricing standards that we have at the moment through to some firms are looking to sort of almost take their bookkeeping department out of their normal chargeable hourly rates and actually charging a lower rate for bookkeeping, to just run it as a bit of a loss leader, with a view that then they'll try and sort of cross-sell other services as well. So it's a bit of an unknown one, really. I don't know whether AVN's looking to do a MTD pricing webinar or done anything.
No, I don't know, some of you may well have been on Emma's webinar a little while ago, which looked at some of the similar things and some ideas again for contacting your clients. And actually, if you're an AVN member, there is a resource which has gone into System Builder last week, and we're also about to send you out a printed version of that. So you will have an additional resource to this, which I think actually complements this webinar as really well.
Yeah.
That is just for AVN members. As Vicky says, I think pricing, it's such a
It's,
field. Yeah, exactly. It's how long is a piece of string, and it is going to depend very much on how much time you're going to spend on that, the resources you've got available. So I think it's something, I'm afraid, you're going to have to come up with yourself.
yeah.
Yeah. There's one thing in the chat from John saying, I think it all sounds great in principle, but my biggest concern is getting these smaller clients to provide the information on time every time, as the admin of chasing is potentially a nightmare.
Mhm.
And I mean, I think it's like the January chasing, I guess, isn't it? But more frequently.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's presumably the whole point of getting your strategy in place now and really reinforcing that message.
Yeah, absolutely. Just repetition. It will feel at times like you're banging your head against a brick wall, but unfortunately, it's just going to have to be done. And bluntly, until people don't do it and they get penalised for it, that's, for a lot of them, that's what will shake them into getting on top of it all. So
Yeah.
having said that, I've spoken to a few accountancy firms who are actually having a proactive cull of such clients.
Oh, right. That's interesting.
To sort of
Yeah.
head that problem off at the pass before they even get anywhere close to it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I was going to say, Vicky, if you want to stop screen sharing now, and then we'll pop up again on screen. So there's another question from Jazz. As a professional, we should be advocating charging for this additional workload or direct them to self-assessment, give them options, thoughts?
Well, it was interesting when I did my little straw poll. How many people I actually spoke to face who actually were doing their self-assessment themselves? And I think that could be a good option, and probably leads in quite nicely to the previous question about the people that we've got to chase. Then maybe you've put some very strong tips and ideas and practical advice on your website that you can give people, that if you want to do it yourself, you don't want us involved, here's a handy help sheet of what you need to do, like a step-by-step way of doing that. But yeah, in terms of the the packaging of what services you offer. Quite often, the overall marketing strategy is actually who are we targeting? What services are we targeting them with? So it's sort of been clear really where you want to go with it, and sometimes sticking by your guns. Sometimes you'll have to say no to a client or potential client, say, actually, we're not in the market to work with you. Have you tried X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, yeah. Mizuyo said, I need the package for my client, totally panicky to any taxes. I'm not sure if that just
Yeah,
if when your clients are panicking or you're panicking. I'm not quite
yeah.
sure. But yeah, and obviously all the resources that Vicky's got available and the resource for AVN members, just I'd say take advantage of anything that's out there, and then you can build
Yeah,
what's right for
absolutely.
you, can't you?
Yeah, and nothing's set in stone. And I think, I said in one of my last slides that when you're looking at your strategy for targeting the 30,000 and 20,000 people, you will need to fine tune what you've done this year, because what's worked for the 50,000 cohort may not work for the others. So yeah, marketing is quite a fluid thing. So it's keeping track of what you're doing, what's working, what isn't working, and not being afraid to to make those changes, try different things, and just keep tweaking.
Yeah.
I'd love to say that marketing is like an accountant's, balance sheet. It's always got to balance at the bottom. Unfortunately, it doesn't. It is a bit of trial and error, I'm afraid. But yeah, I'm happy to sort of have a chat with people and help you on that journey if that would be of assistance, certainly. So
Yeah. I don't know if you want to put that link to book a call with you in the chat, actually.
yes, let me just do that. If not, I'll send it to you, Susan, just to
Yeah,
sort of
and
send
I'll
that.
put that in the follow-up email as well, so you've got it there.
Yeah.
So Jazz is asking again, additional resourcing, other firms' early thinking. I presume this is bringing in additional resource to deal with MTD. I don't know what anybody else thinks about that.
Yeah, I don't know if that's just for the accountants on the chat or you want sort of my sort of feedback, but let's open it up to the chat first.
Yeah, it'd be great. I mean, it'd be great to get everybody's opinions on this and how you're already finding it, whether you've done a lot of marketing, whether you're trying not to, be trying to avoid it. Yeah, it'd be really good to know what everybody else is thinking so far.
Yeah.
Um,
I know I've seen a couple of firms, accountancy firms on LinkedIn, who have obviously been very proactive, not and been doing this for some time, but they're working with like virtual assistants and actually putting together a package of saying to virtual assistants, do you want to widen your portfolio of services by getting involved with bookkeeping? And actually they've devised it, and I must admit I'd need to double check how they've done it, but basically they've created, as an accountancy firm, they've created a sub service, if you like. Sub sounds a bit demeaning, but a separate service working with local virtual assistants. So they've actually got somewhere that they can put their bookkeeping, so it's not being outsourced to India or Philippines or whatever. It's actually sort of local still, but actually just helping local people add a string to their bow and doing it that way. Which I thought, actually, that's quite a nice way
yeah.
of doing it. Now, in terms of what they're charging, I don't know. I saw somebody the other day had put out that they were looking for to recruit a bookkeeper, and they were looking to charge £20 an, although sorry, they were going to pay £20 an hour, and that seemed to be shot down in flames by a lot of other firms saying, wow, bookkeepers these days are charging 30, £40 an hour. So
Right.
yeah, an interesting concept. Whether virtual assistants would you get them less as part of working for your firm, I don't know, but it's something to think about. So
Yeah, so what's Angela's saying, I'm getting inquiries from accountants to help with bookkeeping, and she's a
yeah,
certified
I could
bookkeeper.
believe that.
So yeah.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of different ways to manage this, aren't there?
Yeah. And actually, and Angela, that might be something that you should actively promote on your website. You'll be trying to get your own clients in, but do you need a separate section that actually talks to accountants and how you can help accountancy firms, with bookkeeping? Is there a different sort of marketing angle there that you could take on board, even potentially a marketing campaign to local accountants to say, look, I'm doing this for 1 or 2 clients, I have, provided you've got the capacity, obviously, I'm happy to take on more. So
Yeah, yeah, brilliant idea, she says. I mean, that's great. I can't see any more questions. If you've got any last minute questions, do type them in when we're coming to the end of our time. But I do think it's been such a useful session, really practical tips. And I think, well, as you said, really clear how to get this message out there and communicate to everybody who needs to know about it. So please do say thank you in the chat to Vicki. I do think it's been a really useful session. And as I said, if you're an AVN member, you've got an additional resource on MTD in System Builder. And the recording of this and the slides will be in the Know-How Club later on this afternoon. So what's Jazz saying? It's just flicked up. Our thoughts will need support, no doubt. Other immediate challenges make it necessary. Yeah, I mean, if there's going to be extra work, then yeah,
yeah,
a lot of people will need extra
yeah,
support.
definitely. No,
But
that's fine.
thank you. Sorry, Karen.
I was going to say, I did put the 2 links in on the
Yeah,
chat, one to the free review and one to the MTD marketing document. So by all means, have a look. And if you want to have a chat with me before you do any of that, that's absolutely fine. So
that's great. So thank you so much, Vicki. It's been a really, really useful session. And thanks everybody for joining us today. And we'll see you all again next week, I hope.
yep.
Okay, so thank you very
Cheers.
much.
Bye,
All right.
everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.